This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at javascriptjabber.com/KendoUI.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Views on Vue. My name is Chris Fritz, and today on our panel, we have Divya Sasidharan.
Hello.
And our guest today is Eduardo San Martin Morote. Is that right?
Nice. Yeah, that's right.
Beautiful. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a freelance developer, consultant as well. I really like to speak at conferences, and mainly I am a core team member as you, Chris, of Vue.js, and I really love contributing to open source, especially the Vue ecosystem, which I really enjoy working with.
Cool. And you're joining us today from what country now? You're still in Paris?
Still in Paris, in France. It's 9 p.m., sorry, in the evening.
Wonderful. Well, I will hope to not keep you up too late.
That's okay. It's Saturday tomorrow, so
a lot of people who don't recognize your name might know you online, on Twitter and on GitHub as Posva.
Yeah.
So what's the story behind that? Why are you called Posva on GitHub and Twitter and everything?
So pretty much everybody who started doing things on a computer when they were kids, they didn't use the actual names when they started playing video games or coding things. So when I was a kid, I chose a Spanish expression that was used by a Spanish humorist. And that expression in Spanish is pues va a ser que no. And it literally means it's not going to happen, more or less. It's that kind of expression. And the person, the humorist, was saying pues va a ser que no with a contracted version. And so I was using at first that name, but it was a bit longer than still shorter than my real name. And somebody called me Posva on the net. And I think I was 13 at that age, or 12 maybe. Mm-hmm. And so I kept that name because I thought it was short, it was great. And I've been using that name since I was 13. And because I started doing open source things, coding video games and then open source in the web between 17 and 20 and now the present, mm-hmm. I just kept the name. And also because my name is so long, it's so much easier for me to have a short version that I can relate to and I can present myself as.
Yeah, if you want to be short, it's probably not very easy to find like Eduardo as a username.
Yeah, no.
There's a few others out there.
No, it's way too easy to find. And because it's a Spanish name, you'll find a lot of people.
So it's an abbreviation of an abbreviation, and then
of an expression.
Shorten it just to plus and then P one day.
Yeah, I wish I could, but I will never find a domain name with that.
Yeah, so you need just the right amount of shortness.
Yeah, actually, I'm still. So at some point it went. It was like some kind of fashion where if you have a username, mm-hmm. you could try to make your full domain name to be your full your name or your username by mm-hmm. using some extension that was part of the name, the end, to be specific. In my case, I was very frustrated because when I checked the extension .va, it stands for Vatican. So it's impossible to register any domain name. So I completely get back from that thing. I had to buy a .net domain.
You're going to need to make some new friends, some new connections to be able to get
Vatican,
that one.
Yeah.
Well, we can work on it. Maybe you can move to Rome.
We should.
Okay. So talking about some Vue stuff, one of the first things that I wanted to talk about is distributing component libraries. So you have a lot of component libraries that you've made. One of the most famous ones, I think, is Vue-mdl.
Oh, yeah, that's actually how I started with Vue. So I really love, because the way you build components with Vue is so fun. I really love building components that I can use in different scenarios. And the more I build them, the more I dig into functionalities, and the more I get to know very abstract components I can build and very simple ones that do not cover a lot of things. So the way I build components...
Or taking a step back, what is a component library? Like, what does that mean?
What's a component library? So a component library is a set of one or more components and sometimes directives that brings some functionality to your to your application. Now, that functionality can either be better, like easier refactoring. Not refactoring is not the word, but architecture, easier architecture, more expressive syntax. So most of the time that's just being declarative instead of being imperative. So it fits more the Vue mindset. And sometimes if the functionality is easy enough, it can be a directive that only plays around with the DOM element bit.
Okay. So it's sort of like if people have used jQuery, is it kind of like jQuery plugins where you have this like underlying library and then you have something that builds on top of it that does something else? So for like a component, for example, you basically have like a custom element that you don't have to maintain that you can use. Or in a directive, you have a custom attribute that like has some special behavior associated with it.
Yeah, that's definitely the kind of components I will build. So for instance, Vue-mdl, which I no longer maintain because MDL is anyway. Is it okay?
Yeah. What does MDL stand for?
Oh yeah, MDL. MDL is Material Design Lite. So it was a project that Google started building. I don't know the person. I think it was Adios Mani who started building it, or one of the persons. And it was just a framework agnostic way of building material design web applications. But at some point, they started a different project that was like the new version, but it was completely different. Kind of going from Angular 1 to Angular 2, but even better. I mean, even better in the sense of more breaking changes and for the good. So it's called Material. Okay, I always mess up because they use a different acronym in their components that the name of the library, so it's misleading. It's Material Web Components or Material Design Components. I think it's Material Web Components, but they always use MDC, and I think they do that because they also have other abstractions for iOS and Android, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay, and the idea is like libraries like that have like buttons and like modals and checkboxes and things like that are all styled in a cohesive way. Yes.
The thing is, at some point, I stopped developing these tools because they do demand a lot of a huge amount of time from your part as a developer, as a maintainer, to contribute the components, to make sure everything is architecturally right, that you use your code so you have a smaller and lighter library, and that you keep up to date with the components they bring. And it doesn't look like it takes a lot of time, but if you add the test, because I always test my components, if you add the test, the visual regression tools that you may want to add, if you want to add some demos, the documentation takes, it's just too much. And at the end, I was seeing projects like Vuetify that do a very good job on keeping the real feeling of a material application, which I think is one of the main points of using material design components. So eventually, I'm not longer doing anything in Vue-mdc, to be honest. It's a very, very hard project for me to maintain. I would rather spend time doing Vue Router or even anything else Vue related that is more useful to the community.
So what other kind of community projects have you been working on lately, for component libraries or plugins or?
So recently, I think it's yesterday or 2 days ago. 2 days ago, probably.
Oh, this is super hot. Super hot,
yeah. I released a small library. It's around 300 bytes gzipped. It's Vue.
And it doesn't do anything, but it's very small.
No, it does something. It does one thing, which is the point, right? It's called Vue-Coerce-Props, and the idea is to more or less bring back the V1 functionality in userland, which was called coerce. Now, coerce, for those who doesn't know, is a function that you apply to a prop and then basically transform the prop to whatever you want. So, for example, you can make sure that the value is always a number, even if you get a string, for example, or you can always get the lowercase version or the uppercase version. So because in Vue, we remove that function because computed properties are basically that. But still out of people, by lot, at least three people open issues about it, and I had to close them saying, no, this was removed, duplicate off, blah, blah, blah. I thought, well, maybe there is actually a need for people to have this differentiation, and I couldn't find the package for it. And I knew it's buildable in New Zealand, and it's also something that I always say. It's something that you can build in New Zealand. So I built this mixin that you can install globally, actually, or locally if you want, that will take away the coerce function inside of a prop definition and create a computer property that use all these functions to have an object with all the coerced values. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. So you have the original value in the prop, and you have an object $coerced that contains every single prop you want to coerce. And other than that, the thing before that, I did something called Vue-promised, which is a library that allows you to declarativize. I mean, that's not a word, but you can make it up.
We will make words up all the time.
Promises. So you can basically pass a promise to a component and also give to a component what it should render if the promise is ever resolved, what it should render while it is waiting, and what it should render if it fails. So it makes everything declarative instead of having to call the promise in your code and do all the checks imperatively, create local variables in your component to handle the state. Is there an error? Is it pending? It is loading? And then do the if, else if, and else on your code.
So what's a situation where you would use that?
So every time you want to retrieve some information in an application, I also almost always use it for API calls. So I fetch some information. So what I do is I still, in the data, I probably call the promise, and I can pass it to a property in the data, and then I just pass that property into the promise component. And then inside of the component, I would rather use some kind of placeholder. So, for example, the SVG placeholder that is very popular right now that everybody is using. Even YouTube is now using it. I don't know if you notice it, but it's like the whole thing right now. You have to do it. So I put that in the pending phase. Then, if everything loads correctly, I just pass the information down to a list component. If it's a list of information, if it's just one piece of information like a contact, a movie, or something, I will pass it to a component so I can display that. It could be the page, actually, if you want. You can really play around the concept as well, because you can build higher order components that you promise to return views that you can pass to a router, but this gets quite complicated.
Okay, so like if someone is fetching like a list of users, you can say like what to show while it's still fetching the users, and then how to display the users. And then if it can't fetch the users for some reason, it shows a little message saying, sorry, you have no friends, or sorry, there's a problem with our API.
Yeah, exactly that.
Was the specific library, like for Vue-promised, for example, was it something that you found, like you were working on and you wished that there was a more declarative way of doing promises? Because I think currently anyone who's writing a Vue application, you would just write your promise like in your method itself, or like in your computed, or whichever the lifecycle hook is. So like what was the problem? Like why did you think, or like why did you feel like this was needed personally for you?
So every time I build an application and I have an API, which is 80% of the time, I mean, not 80, but 99% of the time, even if I have views, because it also works with views, you put the fetch in the action and you return the promise. And it's the same thing. You just pass the action to the promise. I mean, the result of the action to the promise. Well, I always have this loading variable locally that you set to true when you start, then you set to false, and you have a watcher on the route, etc. So you have to do all these mechanisms. Like you have to watch as well, because if you are on a page, I'm watching the route or the query if I want to rearrange the new calls for the API. But instead, what I can do is just set. So just call the action and put that into the variable, and everything will be taken care of by the component. So I think it's a pattern that I always use in any application. And I always find myself repeating the behaviors. So I found that was also interesting. And it was also because at that time, I was playing a bit by passing information to scope loads, writing pure JavaScript, because actually a lot of my components are pure JavaScript. There is no Vue, even if I really, really love the Vue single file component syntax, but there is no need for it.
So when you say you mean there's no template, right?
There is no template. There is only render functions. I don't need a
render
template
function
for that.
Because you're that hardcore.
Hardcore, exactly. I'm a real one.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious. So why you decided to do that?
Oh, actually, it makes things so much easier in a lot of terms. Sometimes it's not even possible to use the template. And most of the time, that's the reason, to be honest. You cannot do it with a template. You have to use a render function. But it also removes me the hassle of adding the Vue loader to tests. I mean, to the project, right? I don't need to use Vue loader, so I can remove that from the dependencies. So testing is also easier because I don't have to configure. I use JS usually, so I don't have to configure Vue.js. And then I don't have to configure anything for the linter as well or anything else.
So are you using styles with those components or?
No, most of them are just pure logic. Those are my preferred kind of components.
Got it.
I actually like that way of development because it gives the user of your plugin or your component a lot more flexibility because they can hook into the specific logic of your component and then decide for themselves how they want to style it.
Yeah, it's really nice for library code.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually when I build my components, I'm not always only thinking about applications, but sometimes the components can also be used to build other libraries of components. And most of my libraries like Vue Twizzing, Vue Motion, which are libraries for JavaScript animations, are also template-less components. They use render functions in JavaScript.
So they don't need to be compiled.
They don't need to be compiled either.
So what are some other advantages of using like templates versus render functions? Are there times when you'll use a template instead?
When I use it,
and why? So what's the difference for you?
When I'm building, so in applications, I always use templates.
Okay, so in applications, you always use templates, and in library code, you like to only use or almost only use render functions.
Yeah.
So why is that? What's the difference between libraries and apps?
Well, when you build a library, you are creating an API that another developer can use. So they don't need to know about the code inside. But when you're building an application, you're not only building an application for the users that are going to use the application. You also build an application that other developers have to maintain. So you have to know the code. And templates are definitely more expressive than render functions. It would be a pain to write all your applications in render functions. So even if the code is very easy to write with a render function, I will still use GS6 probably in an application because it's more expressive. It reads better. It looks more like a template.
Yeah, a little bit more declarative.
Than a render function. So in an application, more developers will understand it. While if I write a render function, newcomers will definitely not get what is happening there. So it will be a bad point for the project to maintain ability.
Yeah. Yeah, that is something that I do like about templates is that they are fully declarative and there's usually only like one right way to write a template. Whereas with render functions, sometimes things can feel a little bit awkward and there's more like potential bike shedding that you could do. But it also,
so much.
It also does give you, more power.
Freedom.
Yes.
And power.
Where you need the full programmatic power of JavaScript.
To use JSX or not to use JSX in your render function as well.
I use both. I embrace both of them. Yes. I use more non-JSX. I write more non-JSX render functions than JSX render functions.
Okay.
So do you still write render functions in your application code? Or is it all templates?
I almost never write render functions applications. Okay. It may happen if I want to write something very specific to the application that can save a lot of time during the development. So, for example, some very specific high order component or mixing. Well, not a mixing, obviously, because you don't have a render function in it. But something that will be used across many, many components in an application and that are business related, so are specific to that application. But I think about cases, but I've never had the chance to implement it.
Yeah. What about you, Divya? Do you use mostly templates or mostly render functions? Do you use JSX? What's? I
actually echo Eduardo because in my application code, a lot of my stuff is templates, and I'll deliberately use scope slots if I want to use dynamic. If I want my components to be dynamic, because for the exact same reasons. Because if you're onboarding someone, or if you want another developer to review your code, a render function, there's 20 ways of doing it, versus with templates is very declarative. And I think in general, when I work on application code, I like to think in terms of what I'm trying to build visually, and then adding the logic. I like the separation of concerns. And there's certain points where I find render functions useful, but it's usually like I'll abstract that into a specific component in that application. So I'm like, oh, I want to create a Mapbox map on my thing. So I'm going to like add a folder in the application that's specifically Mapbox that has render functions, but then in the main application, I'll just include that as a component. So it's still declarative, with like some of the render function abstracted away, kind of tucked away in a corner. Be like, don't look here, just look here. because it's a bit complex, I think. And I believe that when you're building Vue.js applications, there are a lot of like using templates gives you a lot of flexibility. And so, yeah, I'm hard pressed to find a reason to use render functions like specifically when you're building some applications versus libraries or plugins.
So when a situation is simple enough for templates, which is like 99% of all situations, you prefer to use templates. But in the cases where the needs are a little bit more complex, you're willing to go a little bit more complex with a render function.
Yeah, definitely. So that's exactly the similar use cases, Eduardo.
Okay, cool.
And I think in your case, you probably get it helps to have a React background that most Vue developers don't have, because you are used to creating more complex and abstract components that you can where you can abstract the behavior and make things very declarative. Yeah.
It definitely helps because you do. It's when you use render functions, you do end up writing it more React-like, which is. To when I show my code to React developers, they're like, "Oh, this is awesome! Like, so cool. I would use Vue if this was the way." I actually recently found, like, I was talking to Chris about it this week about Vue class components, which is like allowing you to do classes in Vue with TypeScript, and the code looks exactly like you would write React, like a React component. It's the same, and so I think what was his name?
Thieves.
Yeah. He posted like the code snippet and like got so many likes from people because he's like, "Is this Vue or is this React?"
So that
a lot of concepts transfer very well.
Yeah,
there really is a lot in common.
Completely. But I do like to still maintain that separation of concerns because I think that's the reason that people reach for Vue in the first place. Because you can think about things separately rather than like all together, which is how you would do in React, because you have JavaScript and your templates and your JavaScript. And so when I write my code, mostly in order to like make Vue more accessible to people, I mostly use templates.
Oh, I think of it a little bit differently from separation of concerns. Like something that I like about having a template, which is really just HTML. With some added bits on top of it. It's like super HTML. There aren't exceptions where like, oh yeah, you can do this in HTML, but you can't do this in a template. There's nothing like that.
Yeah, completely.
And with the script part, the JavaScript, it is just JavaScript. And with the CSS, like I can use like CSS or CSS preprocessors. Like I don't have to do something special with like CSS and JS in order to get this working like with my component. In order to get it tied with my component, in order to get things like, dead code elimination for my CSS. And so, like, there are just fewer abstractions. Like, that's the benefit for me, I think. Like, I can just use HTML. I can just use JavaScript. I can just use CSS rather than abstractions on top of HTML and abstractions on top of CSS. That then sometimes don't work. It's like, oh, yeah, you can do this as long as you don't want to, like, hover. No, like, the options are getting better and better, but it is nice to not have to learn something new to write the same CSS that you've been writing and have it be scoped and everything.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah, because it's like what you said. You can start very simple and then add complexity to it. So you could pretty much write HTML, and then if you want added logic, there Vue offers you directives, and you can use those. And then if you want additional complexity or additional logic, you could create your own custom directives. So if you wanted to go one step further, you could create your own plugin or library, which you can include in your code. And you can just keep going like deeper and deeper. But the nice thing is that the entry point or the barrier to entry is low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people appreciate. Yeah, so something that we talked about a little bit when we were talking about the Vue-promised library So something that you mentioned is you aren't including any like CSS in that component. So what if a user wanted to style that component?
So the thing is, that component doesn't render anything by itself.
It doesn't render anything.
It renders things passed by the user. So the user can still style anything the same way they will actually style anything else.
How does it not render anything?
Because it doesn't create any new virtual DOM, I would say. It uses what it gets in the slots, and it just render that. And this is something that you can only do in render functions, for example.
Okay. So actually asking the question, like, how would you style it? Like, you just style it in the template that is using it, because like all of the like custom all of the HTML that will actually render is
already there.
Is already there. Yeah, it's in that parent component. Yeah,
exactly. There is nothing inside promised.
Whoa. So like, do you have a special name for these kinds of components?
No, and I think.
What do you mean no?
Chris,
I set you up. The answer is yes.
Okay. Let's repeat that. Let's repeat that one.
Yeah, go ahead. No. We're not cutting that out. That's in. That's staying in.
Okay. Now I forgot the name of this guy.
So I'll help you out here. Or Divya, I can see Divya like screaming to herself. She can help you out.
Renderless components.
Yeah, that's how they name it in React, right?
Actually, I don't know if React calls it renderless components, because I actually mentioned that to Michael Jackson in a meetup, and he was like,
Michael Jackson?
There's a
he's a React guy, not that Michael
Jackson.
Okay, sorry.
Different Michael Jackson.
A React developer. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing renderless components here. And then he was like, what's a renderless component? So I don't know if it's a React thing, honestly.
I think they're generally called abstract components in React.
Or maybe
I don't know.
render null component. I don't know. It's because it's just the idea of like returning null in your render function, essentially.
Yeah, or I mean, I think like those components don't necessarily have to render null. Like in the case of Vue-promised, you're rendering stuff from scope slot, right?
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know how it works in React, but in Vue, if you want to actually use whatever is inside of the components. For example, if you're creating a 3D scene and you want to have a scene component, and instead of that scene component, you want to have a camera component that controls the camera, and then maybe you want maybe a box and a sphere, or use two other components that are inside of the scene. You still need to render the children. Like you have to, in the JavaScript code, you have to return and then call age with something, so you can create a div or a span, doesn't really matter, because you're not going to put anything actually, and then pass on the children, so the slot default or whatever, because otherwise Vue is not going to render the components and is not going to call the render functions, which are probably going to add things to the scene. And it's not about the render function itself, because it could be in the created, but that's the important thing, is that the component is not going to be to go through the life cycle. It's not going to be created at all.
Yeah, I think in React it's just children are accessible as props, and so in the render you pretty much just do this.props of children in curly braces, and then it returns the children.
And that doesn't work in Vue because we cannot still return multiple elements, except for functional components. But
functional components with render functions, you can do that. Yeah,
but you cannot use all the lifecycle hooks like created, before destroy, that you will use with scene and all these kinds of things.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. We need a concept of fragments in Vue.
Well, not necessarily fragments, but to be able to return multiple root nodes.
That is a fragment.
No, but we could do that without having a concept of fragments. Like it just works. You just don't need to know about anything extra.
True. That's true.
Yeah, we like not naming things, right?
I mean, I think whenever possible, it's nice to have to have a name for something.
It was
just return an array of things.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't a joke. I mean, even when we do the template compilation, it was just template compilation. And then I remember it was funny to me because when I saw Angular call it, we have ahead of time. And I was like, what the hell? That sounds sexy, right? It's just template compilation, right? It's nothing new. And okay, well, that is less sexy. But I think maybe it impressed some people, but maybe it also afraid. I'm not sure I think it impressed more people than it afraid, but I still If something doesn't need a name, doesn't give it a name. To me, that's also a syndrome of the engineer. And it also goes with over-engineering things. It's giving a name to things we don't need.
I think it is really hard, though. Like, sometimes someone else has given something a name, like it already has a name, but it's difficult to like know like what everybody else is thinking and like what else has already been invented. And so, sometimes we come up with names that, really are like another concept that people already know, but like you didn't know that concept, or it's not exactly like that concept. So you think of it a little bit differently in your head, and so you give it a different name. But I mean, that is something that's really hard in API design, and also when you're like marketing things, when you're talking about things, and you want to get people hyped about a new feature, like
completely.
It can be difficult to know how to talk about it. So I can feel for that, and I think it's a problem that like we all suffer from. Yeah,
but I think in those cases, it means that it needs a name. If you talk too much about something, then it needs a name. Is ahead of time something you're going to talk about a lot? I don't think so. It's something you name. Say, hey, we have ahead of time compilation. It brings you more speed because you compile templates ahead of the runtime and doing the bundling phase. It's something you explain once and then you remember, right?
That's an interesting rule. Yeah. Okay. So when other cases, like would you want to use, abstract or renderless components, components that don't render anything themselves, or maybe don't render anything at all?
Other scenarios? Because the first part was it lagged. I couldn't hear it.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. So what are some other cases when you might want to use an abstract or renderless component? Have you built other abstract or renderless components?
Okay, yeah. So apart from Vue Motion, Vue Tweezing, which are for GS animations, so it only handles the GS part of things. You have to be creative and do the animations yourself. I also created with Damien, so Chantal on GitHub, another core team member. Mm-hmm. We created Vue Global Events. So it's a component that doesn't render anything, and it only benefits from the syntax that you have for events in Vue. Mm-hmm. So you basically attach any event to that component that you can put anywhere and multiple times in your application, and the component will just attach the event to document.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
So it allows you to handle shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts in your application. And other scenarios.
If you have a tabbed interface and you want to use like Control Tab or Command Tab or something like that to switch between tabs, like you'd set up a shortcut like that so that whenever they press it, it's not attached to a specific element, but whenever they press that, like it'll switch between those.
Yeah.
When that component is rendered.
Exactly. Yes. So it also remove the listeners when the components appear, so you can put it on views, and then you can use shortcuts to use, and makes everything declarative. It's always the same. It's always about being declarative. But the really exceptional part of that component is that you use the same syntax you use on elements, and that's what it makes it very very cool to use.
So what's not declarative about like window.addEventListener or something like that, and then window.removeEventListener?
Exactly.
And then setting up a method for that. Like what's not declarative about it?
The fact that you have to care about the creation and the destruction of the things is what makes it non-declarative. And that's the full power of declarative. So it makes more sense when you talk about non-HTML interfaces. So when you use components to render all the things in HTML, like a video game or more simply a 3D scene. If you have, so if you render your 3D scene with a HTML-like structure by using components, and as we said before, we have the scene, we have the camera, we have some objects. You could, for example, have an array of cubes, or, well, this is a very simple example, but it could be the enemies. You have an array of enemies. You could have just the map. It would be an object with a positioner, or an array of blocks where you position the cubes where the character, the player can go on.
And so these are like enemy components?
Yes. But the thing is, you still have this data, this pure data that represents your application. Mm-hmm. And you look through it like you will really do in a normal HTML page. Mm-hmm. And you are doing it with components that are enemies, the player, the cubes, and blocks. And you use past the props like the position, the rotation of those elements. And if you pop something from the array, then it's not going to render the component, it's going to remove it from the HTML. And because you set up inside of the component the hooks to remove that element from the scene, everything is going to work seamlessly for the developer who is creating the 3D scene. He doesn't have to care about tearing down any element in the scene, creating anything in the scene, attaching things together. So, for example, in 3D, we have this concept called mesh, textures, and I think there are some others having a long time study on 3D. Mm-hmm. But basically, you have to combine some of them together. So it's also possible to reuse the same mesh in some scenarios, the same texture as well. But if you nest them, you're naturally saying, it's just an example, but you're naturally saying this mesh should use this texture, for example. And the same applies to maps.
And then the texture also, would that be a custom like component?
Yeah, of course. And it will handle the loading, for example, async loading if you want.
So you just say like, this is a texture, and then you pass it some like attributes, via props. So like you say, texture, color blue or something like that, or,
Yeah, it could have the opacity, for example.
Gradient and stuff like that. So you're basically like inventing your own elements that like define how these things work.
Yeah.
And then inside of the component, is that like, how does that work inside of it?
Inside of the component, you have to handle the created event and the before destroy event. So in the created event, you're going to create any classes. You are going to instantiate all the classes that you need, usually only one, but sometimes maybe more. So for example, a texture will create the texture, will load the URL, and will load that texture in the GPU. Mm-hmm. Depending on how you do it, of course. If you do it with Vue.js, it will be easier. If you do it in plain open WebGL, that will be harder. And then if the component can contain anything, you have to return, when you render in the render function, you have to return the children. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you can return null, and it will work. Okay, and in the before destroy, make sure to remove all the resources you use. Otherwise, you get memory leaks.
So inside of those components, you still have that imperative code that takes care of changing state over time, but you have a declarative abstraction over it so that you can reuse that imperative code instead of having to like find some imperative way to fit it all together.
Yeah, because in any ways you would have been writing the imperative code if you didn't have the component. So it's not as if you were writing more code than you will do initially, right? You still have to write that once.
Yeah.
And now you're only writing it once.
But it gives you a way to organize it.
Yeah, and to reuse as well.
Yeah. And I think Divya has also a little bit of experience with renderless components, and you have a different use case that you found really useful with Mapbox.gl, right?
Yeah. It's a similar idea because it pretty much uses WebGL and renders to canvas for performance reasons. And so you pretty much like create declarative. You ultimately are writing to a single DOM node, so there isn't any HTML associated, but you create components as a way of thinking about the canvas layers in pieces. Mm-hmm. So it's easier to like reason about. So because a map usually has multiple layers, you might have, like a point layer that shows you a specific point on a map. And then in addition to that, you might have a pop-up element. So it's similar to the animation pieces where there's like the scene and the camera and all of those pieces.
Yeah.
And so you can create components that essentially are renderless, but they run functions on a specific instance. In this case, a map instance.
So they like manually manipulate the DOM in like created, before, destroy, and also watchers.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the same idea.
But they're using Vue's reactivity system to like make the state changes simpler and to organize it.
Exactly. So you're using Mapbox to handle the DOM manipulation specifically, and then you're using Vue to handle the state management and reactivity. So there's like that. And I think that's Sarah in her talk mentioned this a little bit at VueConf, where she used Vue.js or D3 or something for specific things, D3.
I'm not sure. Maybe both.
Maybe both. But she was mentioning the same thing where Vue does a really good job of state management, and then D3 has its own, and even Vue.js has its own way of manipulating the DOM, and so you separate that way. So especially if you want to integrate like a GL-based library with Vue, that's probably the best way to go about it.
Okay, so like for WebGL and Canvas, it sounds like anytime you want to work with those technologies, that's when this pattern is really useful.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. And then would you also use it with like SVG or something like that? Or is it like anything that's not HTML? I
think SVG is interesting. So I have not worked on a Vue specific thing with SVG, but I have worked on a React like plugin for SVG. And in that case, because SVG is actually rendering to the DOM, like there's specific nodes associated. So there's like a line or a G or whatever. Okay. It's not necessarily Canvas in SVG's case. And so like I worked on D3 Geo, which was D3's Geo library, which is pretty much just so Mapbox renders everything to a single Canvas element. Mm-hmm. And D3 Geo creates SVGs with different like tiles, essentially. Okay. And so there are elements associated with each component. And so it's not, in that use case, it's not necessarily renderless because you are rendering things. It's a bit more complicated in that case because you have to orchestrate everything.
So because SVG is using elements, you can actually like interact with it the same way that you'd interact with HTML elements?
Pretty much, yeah, you would.
Okay, so you wouldn't need this pattern for SVG then?
Not necessarily. Yeah, you wouldn't. I've not used this pattern mostly for SVG at all because of that.
Okay. So moving on then from abstract to renderless components, or actually, no, one more question about that. Like if people want to learn more about this, like if they're thinking like, wow, this sounds interesting. Like how do I actually wrap my head around it? Like this is an audio format, so like we can't stream code into their ears, or we could slowly describe it, but it'd probably be really boring. And if they're like me, they probably won't be able to keep it in their heads. So are there any resources where they could learn more about that kind of pattern?
So I'm gonna be shameless and plug my talk, but I gave a talk about that. Like it's a part of it is about renderless components in my VueConf talk, and there's a GitHub repo with slides and code samples for anyone who is interested in looking at that. Also,
that talk is called a React point of view, right?
Yes, it's called a React point of view because I was a React developer for a long time. #confession time, but.
It's okay, me too.
But the other thing, I think another really good resource that I found was Adam Wathan wrote an article about renderless components, which I think is really good and well explained if you have not used renderless components or if you're unfamiliar with the concept, because he goes into detail. I think he actually implements a specific component that is renderless. So it's a nice way of seeing it implemented because most people need to see the code to have an understanding of the concept. So I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, Ed, I think you helped him with that a little bit, didn't you?
I helped. Did I?
I thought you did. I thought you gave some feedback and stuff like that. Or maybe I'm mistaken.
Maybe I gave. I don't know. It was fun because so Adam dive into the scopes, loads, components, the topic to create more abstract components. Mm-hmm. And the day he talked about that for some kind of fetch component that it was going to fetch a URL was just the day after I released the first version of Vue-promised. Mm-hmm. So it was really funny because I was also digging that topic at the time. I'm not sure if I helped him with that, but to add on top of what Divya said, so her talk was very good. I really recommend it. I don't know if it's online yet. Maybe it's not.
I don't think it. I think they're releasing it in batches. So I think they finished day 1, but day 2 is not released yet.
Yeah, so I can follow you on Twitter if they want to get a news for it. The article was indeed very good, and I would recommend to also check the documentation for render functions. Now I know it's not a very practical documentation, but
Hey, what do you mean it's not practical? We'll talk about this later.
We talk about this later. You want, but no,
we can improve it.
I know, and I think I can help with that.
Okay,
but
yeah, please do.
It contains very important information, and that information is the API. People get confused very easily, about what are the properties that I can pass to the second argument of the create element function and how I can play with that. And this is normal because templates are so easy and everything is automatic. So when they get to the render functions, they have to do a lot of things manually. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know the structure of the second attribute, what we call the data, and what does every key mean, and there are many properties that you have to set, it gets confusing.
Well, you don't have to set them all. I mean,
of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, for example, the slot attribute, the key attribute.
Mm-hmm. And JSX helps abstract some of that. But if you're not familiar with JSX, or you don't want to
pure one,
or if you really want like full control in like pure JavaScript, then you'd have to write that yourself.
I have to say though, since the component docs were improved, or there was an upgrade during VueConf, and so the part of our render function.
I released it the first day of VueConf when we did the workshops.
Yes. So I actually think that so I looked at the docs for render and it improved a lot since then because
I didn't actually improve it. I mean, improving the render function documentation wasn't part of that big push, but we have made improvements to it separately.
Okay, because I remember when I was working on Renderless components, which was like, I don't know, sometime last year, I had difficulty understanding it, but I also came from React, so I just wrote JSX and I was like, whatever.
Okay.
Use Babel.
Well, we can still work on improving it.
Yes.
Okay. And then how, we talked about some libraries that you maintain. Like, how do you come up with ideas for plugins or libraries? Like, there are probably a lot of other people who have found patterns in their applications that they really like. How do you know when it's time to turn that into a library? Or like, where do you start if you decide like, hey, I want to turn this into a library, but like, I'm not even sure how that works. Like, how do you put that together?
So there are many different things. It depends. So it depends from where the inspiration comes from. For example, sometimes the inspiration comes from issues. I think most of the time it comes from issues, like people trying to do things and they don't know about some features of Vue that I know, for example. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, this is possible in userland. We are going to do this feature, for example.
So once you've had to tell people a few times, like, it's possible in userland, it's possible in userland, it's possible.
I'm like, maybe I should create a feature.
Like, maybe
and nobody creates it.
I can also create it in userland. Maybe I will. And then you do a service for the community.
And it's also because it doesn't take me that much time to create the plugin most of the time, at least for the first version. So what I try is to make sure I keep the scope as reduced as possible. And this is for a very good reason, is to prevent me to have to maintain them. This means that people will not fire feature requests because there is nothing to request. It covers everything in the scope it should cover, and they will only fire bug issues. So those are things that I'm going to fix.
Okay, so if you very narrowly define the scope, then you don't really have to maintain it very much. That's the secret.
Yeah. So it may sound, I don't know how it sounds, but it's the reality, and I think it's actually smart. If I, for example, have to maintain something like Vue-mdl, it's because of the, how do we call that? The API surface. The application surface it covers. So for example, Vue router is also quite problematic in that aspect. And I wasn't realizing until Evan told me. I was like, there are so many issues. People are not getting the things in the doc. There are so many problems. I was like, there's so many things wrong. I have to improve. Look at Vuex. It doesn't happen. There is so little issues in Vuex opened. And it's true. Vuex has a much more reduced scope to handle. It's just the state management. So it does it in a way. That's the way it is. there is things you can improve, but there is not that much. In the router, you're still covering a lot of the things, and it interacts with many parts of the application.
There are a lot of things like related to routing that people want to add in.
Yeah. And there are things we don't want to do. There are things that we could do, but we are not sure if it's useful enough, or because it can add to the complexity of the project, to the size of the bundle. And there are also bugs and a lot of browser-related bugs that you can imagine.
So what you're telling people is don't maintain a router.
Well, I think other people...
Don't be like me.
Probably Ryan Florence would be a more appropriate person to talk about that. No, I enjoy it. It's a lot of challenges.
A lot of work on Vue router, right?
As much as I can, yeah. It's still not as much as Evan did. Far from that. But.
What have been some of the biggest challenges that you found? But besides, like figuring out like what features to keep in and what features to keep out, and and maintaining a project like Vue router that like many, many, many people use and rely on, all of ourselves included. Do your features always get in? Do you come up with an idea and you're just like, I have control. I'll just add this. And
I think I don't come up with a lot of ideas. With new features. I come up with ideas, but maybe not features. I came up with very little features idea that I think I may have implemented. The most difficult part is setting the line on the this should be handled in the router. This is easy enough to be handled outside. And sometimes it's very tempting for me. Yeah, sorry.
Do you have any rules or steps that you follow to figure out, like, is this something that we should include in the router, or is this something we leave out? Like, how do you decide?
I try to apply the same criteria as Vue. I try, because I'm obviously not Evan, so I cannot be in his mind to think how things are. Most of the time, I do not refuse feature requests if I think that other people may find it interesting. So I just label them as feature requests and wait to see what happens. Doesn't mean I am going to implement them in the future, but it means that I want to hear other opinions.
And with their use cases and things like that.
Yeah.
So you leave it open for discussion, and you let people in the community and also other like core members talk about what they'd find useful and what their thoughts are.
Yeah. And the way I put the line is, there are many things. I have red flags, of course. If something is an anti-pattern, I will refuse it. For example, adding state to the route that is not visible on the URL. This is a red flag. This is a no-go. This is part of the way we want the router to be.
So you have some principles that you've defined for the router.
My principles, yes.
And you've decided these are guiding principles, and if something goes against those, we won't include it.
Yeah, I try to base that on what Evan let out. Or things that Evan said. So I keep things as true as possible. And it's also the way I think anyways. It's not as if I was doing it against my will, or my way of thinking.
Yeah.
But it's also...
To make it clear to everybody, Evan is not forcing you to do his bidding.
No, he's not. And there is also when you can do things on userland very easily. And introducing a feature is just a new way of doing things. And in the router, there are already many ways of doing the same thing in different scenarios. They lead to different kind of architectures, so they help most of them. But I want to prevent adding new ways of doing the same thing over and over. And that could make it even harder for newcomers to use the router.
What was the last feature that you added to Vue router where you had to make a decision like this? And discuss it with people and figure out how you're going to implement it, and then it did actually get implemented.
I don't remember right now because I don't want to add new big features to Vue router, so I always ask Evan about that.
Well, what's one that you remember?
So that I coded, or that because I also
it doesn't have to be something that you coded, but you're part of moderating, the discussions and things like that. So
there was a functional component thing, the functional router link component. So right now the router link is a normal component, and it has some trouble keeping up to date with the URL changes, I would say. So there are many bugs around that. And we talk about, hey, the router link could be a functional component. There is no state at all. It's only props and function calls, and it just renders a link. It's very, very simple. And we were like, so Alanson, which is also the other maintainer of Vue router, was, yeah, we should maybe do a functional component. But at the end, because we are working on, so you're trying to make your life out, because of course this is always on my free time, and you know that as well because you also do it. Yeah. So you don't find the time to do it because some tasks do require some hours of thinking and testing things to make sure you're not breaking anything.
And experimentation,
Experimentation, yeah. So at some point, some person created a pull request for that. And it did take me a lot of time to actually merge it. I mean, it's not even merged yet. It's supposed to be merged this week. But because I want the confirmation from Evan, I want him to review it just in case. Yeah. But I did all the testing. I added more tests, or I checked all the issues and see, oh, this is fixed. This is not fixed by the functional routing. So this is one of the major features I think I help the community to go with, because I'm not the one to create the functional component. Now, to be fair, the functional component is the code itself is not hard at all to do, as long as you know just a little bit, because it's very easy to translate to an actual functional component. But the implications behind that are huge. You don't want to break other people's application by just transforming your routing component.
Okay. What would you say your favorite part? Switching tracks a little bit, but still staying on Vue Router, or Vue Router and other libraries that you maintain. As an open source maintainer, what's your favorite part about that work? You do it in your free time. Are you just, is there something wrong with you, or or is there something that you get out of it?
It's the excitement you get at the beginning when you have this idea that you come up with and being able to bring it to life. To me, programming is all about bringing life to things. It's kind of playing God, to be honest, and without willing to be disrespectful to other people. But it's the way I see it, and I think it's something very fulfilling to a human being to create things. And programming makes it extremely easy for people to create things, because it's not as art where you need a lot of material to create things in any aspect of art. Except music nowadays, we can create music with a computer. But for example, in science as well, you need a lot of material and a lot of funding to do things. You need a laboratory. In programming, you just need a computer, and you're done. You don't need anything else.
So there's very little resources, and you can create a little universe and define the rules.
Exactly, and it's so fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. And then you can delete it because you are a vengeful god.
Yeah. And then
Eduardo giveth, and Eduardo taketh away.
Exactly. If I don't want it, I delete it. And there is also, of course, the knowing that you're helping people out, and when people are grateful to you. So it's also great when the people are grateful to you, because you feel that you're helping not only yourself, but you're also helping someone else. And this is also a good feeling to have.
It's like,
sorry.
No, it's like the realization of your handle.
Yeah.
Pues va a ser que no.
What? Why?
Never mind. It's fine. It's fine.
But, and sometimes you may get some donations, but have happened to me 4 or 5 times maybe. And it was only for Vuetify, so Firebase plus Vue work.
Yeah, you obviously provide a lot of value to a lot of people. Yeah, it's a shame it's hard to get paid for that stuff. That's
same as you.
That's hard to see. I agree. Yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah, people who haven't heard should donate to Chris's Patreon account.
That's not where I was going.
I just thought I'd give a plug for it because I forgot to do it last week.
Well, that's very kind of you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so moving on.
Oh, I had one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Eduardo, you were mentioning because I agree with you completely that working on open source is extremely satisfying and wonderful because you're creating things. How do you make strike the balance between, because in addition, open source is not just about creating code, it's also about maintaining community, which you alluded to, because you're also doing feature requests and going through the issues in Vue Router to make sure that questions are answered and so on. How do you strike the balance between, the satisfaction element, like the things that you actually enjoy doing and the things that you don't. Because sometimes when that piles up, you start not enjoying open source anymore. So what do you do in that situation?
So if I get it right, it's true that in open source, the same way you get a lot of nice people, you get a lot of jerks that are not there to help you. And because you get a lot of jerks, sometimes when you read issues, so I also do a lot of triaging in Vue, not only Vue router, but also Vue. I try to triage the best I can, so refuse feature requests as well when they are not worth implementing for Vue, or they should not be in Vue because they do not follow the principles.
Yeah, not in line with the core principles, the values.
Yeah. With bug fixes as well. And it's hard to know sometimes if people are really trying to be helpful or they are just there to get their problem solved. And so after some time, of course, it's harder at the beginning, but after some time, I don't care anymore about what people may say. So if I'm very cold in the issues, and except when I recognize the people, because I see some people from time to time, I know they are helpful, so I recognize the avatar, and I take more time to read their issues, because if they are reporting something, they have been there for a long time, so I know there is something. But where people have never reported an issue, which, by the way, it's easy to recognize with an extension of Chrome, where you can see if people have opened other issues in that repository. So I see things, I check the code, but if there is not enough information, of course, if the issue is not boiled down, I won't bother more than maybe 2 minutes to read the code. If I cannot find the thing to help them, I would just point them to the forums or the Discord chat where there is a lot of people and tell them that the issues are not for questions. And that's how the way I do is have a notifications tab on GitHub, and I reload it from time to time, and I see everything. And I keep my notifications empty, actually.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Good for you.
I also think that, I noticed that in a lot of your plugins and libraries, and it's the same for a lot of the Vue core libraries as well, there is the template that you add for when you have an issue or when you have a pull request, which makes it really useful as someone who's I want to file an issue or a pull request. It gives you a template, which I think is good because it's helping yourself in some sense, because then it forces someone to ask whether or not it's worth putting in issues or putting in a forum or something like that. So
yeah, to read, it makes the people read. So it prevents you from saying something that you have been saying all the time. And there is something I forgot, but 1 year ago, I think I don't know if it's 1 year or less, we added a bot that was closing issues that were not respecting the guidelines. And this was a lifesaver. I was tired of answering, of just having this quick reply, please read the contribution guidelines before posting an issue and closing the issue without reading. If the issue was, if there was no link to a repro with clear steps, I would just not even read the thing. I was like, but at the same time, you feel guilty, so you still read a bit and you waste time. And not having to deal with that anymore is great. And I see it because I see people, when people open an issue that get closed right away, and they reopen a new one, you can see if they put the time to provide a repro or if they didn't. You see it right away, because if the repro is boiled down, it means they put the time to do it. If it's not, if it's a whole project, and you see, come on, you can do better than that. And then there's people who just go away and they just didn't realize. So they didn't even read the template. They just saw a bunch of text and said, whatever, let's remove that, create the issue. And then there is a bot closing the issue with a link. And then they don't open a new issue. So that's where you see it really works.
So when you have a really big project that gets as big as Vue, sometimes having a bot and sometimes having some other tools around that, to help people create issues, can be useful.
Definitely it is. And I think, talking about this, we could talk about community, the project that Sebastian Atinix, the creator of Next.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
With more people, so he's not alone. He's with other friends creating that project. And I think
what is it?
So I don't want to misinterpret it, but to me, it's a platform where that is connected to GitHub and that allows to bring or to give visibility to the people that is helping to the project. So to the community, the people that are helping the community of a project to make that project what it is. Because when you think about it, a project like Vue or anything is nothing without the community. It's nothing with the people that are answering questions out there, are reporting bugs, are requesting new features that are interesting. The problem is people ask questions in GitHub issues and they get bloated away very quickly if people do that way. So what community does is synchronize with GitHub. So questions are closed on GitHub and are only on the community website. But requests and bug fixes are synchronized. So everything you comment on community or GitHub will appear in both sides. And people get some kind of reputation. So there is points that you get for contributing to the project with commits, pull requests, comments, the upvotes reactions to your comments, questions, and you can mark questions as resolved the same way as Stack Overflow. And this reputation brings you more visibility in the community so people can see that you're helping the community and the project.
Cool. Yeah. So where can people learn more about that?
The address is cmty.io. So like community without any vowels.
And one M.
And
only one M.
Yeah, only one M. Exactly.
cmty.io. Got it. Okay. We'll include that in the show notes too.
And yeah, they have links in the website. So they use it for the project itself, for community.
Mm-hmm.
And
they use community for community?
Yeah.
Good. Eating their own dog food.
Yeah. And they use it for Nugs, of course.
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of questions there.
Moving on a little bit. One other thing that we were going to talk about that is related to like building and maintaining libraries is like roll it and roll up, which are some tools that you use sometimes to create libraries. And I don't know if we want to go into too much detail because we've been talking for a while now and we don't want the podcast to become too long. But if people want examples of how to set up like a library project, would you say that it's fair that they can look at some of your examples, like how you set things up? And that is a pretty good example of like how to build a nice Vue library? Yeah.
So any of the REST libraries I'm building,
only the recent ones, huh? At what point do you have regrets?
No, I don't have regrets. But so, for example, I have a boilerplate for plugins that is using the old version of the CLI. So when you had templates, I mean, the old version is still the current one, but
yeah.
So that one it fits most people needs, and it actually uses Rollup to bundle your library. So you have a smaller bundle, and you have it's faster as well to bundle. So because Webpack is very nice for applications, it's getting nicer and nicer with every version of it, to be honest. I haven't tested recently with libraries to see what is the difference. But with Rollup, you get a very small package. And because I found myself...
How does that happen? Like you're writing the same code?
Because Webpack adds its header, its own overhead on top of the code. It's very small, but
for a small library, then
for a small library,
it's proportionally larger. Yeah.
It can make a lot. And Rollup doesn't add anything. Does
it have any other optimizations or?
I think not anymore. In the past, there were some other optimizations like through shaking and hosting, but now Webpack also has that. Yeah. And the thing is, because I found myself writing that configuration, the very same configuration every time, I wrote a small CLI that works out of the box with no configuration. So it's called Lite. It's a very small project that I built. Is on GitHub as well.
Yeah. So is that github.com/posva/rollit?
Yeah, that's it. You can actually install it and use it for your libraries. And by default, it takes src/index.js as the entry point. And it releases 4 bundles in the dist folder. One for ESM, so 6 modules.
Nice.
One for CommonJS, one for UMD, so that's universal module that works in the browser, and one for so the same version as UMD but minified, which is the version that I use to check the gzip size.
Mm-hmm.
And it does everything in parallel, so it's quite fast. It works, for example, I also handle adding rollup plugins on the fly, like Flow, for example, so I can use it in just very simple command for router. I have tested it with Vue, with Phaser actually. It worked with Phaser. It's mainly focused for small component libraries because it's just one command that you run and you have all the 4 bundles. It completes your packages.json. So you have the bundles in the main field, the browser, the module. So it's very convenient.
Yeah. And one other thing I think worth checking out is also Vue CLI 3, which is still in beta right now.
Yeah.
It has a concept of targets, and there's a library target, which is what you'd want to use for like building these shared libraries that you might use between projects or share with the entire world.
Which I still haven't checked, by the way. But yeah.
Yeah. So and you can also like check out all of Pozva's repositories to see how he's using it. Again, look at the recent ones, the old ones. Let's not talk about those. Great. I also wanted to talk to you about. You do like consulting work, and you do some like workshops and speaking and stuff like that. Do you have anything coming up? Where people can find you?
Actually, yes. The next workshop I'm giving is in Barcelona, so it will be in summer. So a very good time to be around in Barcelona, which is in case some people doesn't know, it's in Spain and it's near the beach. So it's a really good. It's really cool. In summer, you go to the beach. It's a very touristic place, so it's really great. And there is a conference called Angular Camp, which is not about Angular, it's about JavaScript. And it's the 18th of July. And that's the day I'm giving a workshop. There are other workshops, and there are great speakers already announced. I know Sean Larkin will be there from Webpack, but other people from also the TC39 committee. So it looks like a really interesting conference, actually.
Cool. Where can people sign up for your workshop?
The website is angularcamp.tech. But if they just search for Angular Camp on Google, they will find it. And there are tickets for the conference and the conference pass plus the workshops.
Cool.
You can view the workshops there. Yeah, should be on the page. Just checking just in case. Yeah, there am I.
And what about speaking? Are you speaking anywhere recently or in the near future?
Yeah, we're actually giving the Vue.js road trip. You're coming as well, right? Not to Paris. I know that one, but I don't know which one. I always forget which one is first. I think it's Barcelona first, then Berlin, and then Paris. So I think my next conference is the Vue.js road trip in Barcelona. But I'm also going. Yeah,
I think it might actually be Barcelona and then
Paris and then
Paris
Berlin.
And then Berlin.
Yes, that's it.
But I think that they might not be doing Berlin anymore.
Oh, damn.
I think it might have been too close to Vue.js Amsterdam in February, so they just wanted to consolidate with that. I think so.
Okay. What a shame.
Yeah.
There's something closer. I'm going to Seattle for Microsoft Influencer Days, which I'm not sure if it's an internal event or half open event, but I will be in Seattle for some days. So maybe hang around in some meetup or something.
Cool. That's fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we start wrapping up? Anywhere else that people can find you?
Yes.
And people can find you on GitHub at Posva, Posva. And are you also Posva on Twitter?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's it.
You're not on LiveJournal or anything?
LiveJournal? No, I'm not. I'm on Medium, but I don't write. I don't write blogs anymore. I don't do streaming or anything. At least not yet.
Not yet. Maybe soon.
Maybe soon, but about coding.
You're doing podcasts.
I'm doing podcasts now. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, great. Well, then let's wrap it up with picks. So, Divya has done this many times before. Would you like to go first?
Sure. I'll go first.
For you, Loot Crate is offering an opportunity to save 10% on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Just enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Loot Crate is one of my favorite things. Every month I get a box in the mail, costs less than $20, and it comes with all kinds of goodies. I have stuff from, just looking at my shelf, Batman, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and much, much more. So if you're a geek, a gamer, anything like that, and you want cool stuff to put around your office, cool t-shirts, comic books, etc., then definitely check out Loot Crate. To save 10% on your new subscription, go to lootcrate.com/Ruby. Again, that's lootcrate.com/Ruby to save 10% on any new subscription. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings.
So my first pick is the VueConf talks. Not all have been released. I believe the first days has been released, but not the second. I'm not 100% sure. But that's pretty good. That's on viewmastery.com, I believe. It's pretty good. Second one is the Vue.js library that Ed Yerborough posted. I think that was 6 days ago or something.
The other Ed.
The other Ed.
The other Ed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we have 2 Eds in Vue now.
Yeah, so that has been released, which is really cool because now you can do just with Vue, which I haven't played around with personally, but it's been on my docket, so I will probably do that this weekend. And then the last one is a Netflix show that I've been watching. So I've been learning Spanish. It's muy mal for now. But I've been watching a show called La Casa de Papel, which is really good.
I'm watching it right now. It's on the TV.
Oh, yeah? I absolutely
While we're recording?
Exactly, yeah. You want to see it? Look at that.
Are you on the... Is it the
this is going to be fantastic for an audio medium.
Yeah, I know. But it's still funny.
Yeah.
No, it's a good thing because we might get like in trouble with copyright or something if we showed it.
You showed the video, yeah.
But yeah, that one is really... I'm on season 2, and it's like... I think I'm on the last episode, and it's really, really good. And it's also good because you can like learn. I'm using it as an excuse to learn Spanish, like to practice.
Great. What are your picks?
Okay, so just to be clear, it can be anything, right? It doesn't have to be Vue.
Nope, it does not have to be Vue. It can even be a Netflix show like La Casa de Papel.
Okay, I had to rethink the things because I thought it was things about me, not things that I pick.
Oh, it can be about you too.
Yeah, it can be about you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So recently I got again into typing because I really like mechanical keyboards, like a lot of developers, and typing. And I managed to, for the first time, to go be above 100 words per minute, which is a really nice, to me, is a really nice speed. I was really happy, and I'm doing a more type racing, as we call it, in play.type racing. So I'm really happy with it. I don't know if that counts as a pick.
Yeah.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. It can really be anything.
So I really love how well the Vue in general is going, and how things I was doing before in my free time for free are now that I was just doing because I liked, are making my life better now. And how I can get jobs offers, very, very interesting job offers in things I love, and that I can combine both of like the real job that you get paid for with the open source. It's like a dream come true. It's still not the dream like Evan that works full time, but I think that going part time is already great. And it's something that I'm starting to do right now. More or less, I can do it. I still have to find some time to get the talks, but I really encourage you to anybody that wants to do more open source, that really wants to build their projects, to do some freelancing that could help them to see if they like it, and give them more time to build what they love.
Yeah, it's also like, for me, I find that it gives me like a wide range of experience that I wouldn't have just working at one company, or if I was just working like on solo projects by myself.
Absolutely, you learn more. I mean, you learn more variety of things.
Yeah, I'd be a much worse developer if I didn't consult.
What else? No, I started playing The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Oh, on N64?
No, on 3DS. But it's really cool.
Was that for the first time?
Yeah, the first time I played that Legend of Zelda. Yeah, and it's pretty nice actually. have played some hours already, like 4 hours probably. And I wasn't expecting it to be that good, because when I always try to play the old version in emulator, because you don't always have you don't have the console anymore or things like that, so it's not possible to play on the TV or anything. And you also get all the benefits like save states and stuff, which you don't get in like more modern consoles emulators. But there is a problem with the main problem is the N64 controller, which is unique. So unless you have one playing on emulator, a game that is specifically designed for the N64, it's not that great. And The Legend of Zelda, I think, was one of them, where you have to use the C stick, I think it's called.
Or it's just C buttons.
Oh, the C buttons. Well, you have things that are not in other controllers. So, for example, I use Xbox 360 controller, which is, in my opinion, the best controller that ever existed. I use it for anything, for any game. And because the Nintendo 3DS has similar mapping in terms of buttons, it makes it very easy to enjoy and to play the game normally without being used to a completely different controller.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does it qualify as a pick?
Yeah, I think that's 2 picks. The Xbox 360 controller and Legend of Zelda. Okay, so I'll do my picks. I'm going to do all games this time. It's going to be story-driven games. And the first one is, this isn't actually something that I actually have been playing it sometimes recently, but The Witcher 3, which it comes with a warning because it will ruin all other RPGs for you afterwards. So maybe play this one last on your list of RPGs that you want to play. Otherwise, you might be disappointed with everything else. I'm really looking forward to CD Projekt Red's new game, Cyberpunk 2077, which I think is coming out the end of this year. Hopefully, we'll see. So that's one. But there are a lot of other story-driven games that I enjoy that aren't RPGs, where you're like playing a character and then you're like going around fighting monsters and stuff like that. And one of them that I played quite a while ago is Gone Home, which is what I would describe as a walk 'em up. So you're just walking around this environment, and you can interact with things on a very simple level, but the environment is the story. Like, and as you go around, you're exploring this person's life. And I won't give any more details than that because it really is something special. I think it's like 3 hours or 4 hours experience. So something that you can definitely digest in one evening, and it's just wonderful, magical. I would also say Brothers is another game like that. It's not a walk 'em up, but it's a very unique game in the sense that it's the only game that I know where the controls are like a part of the story of the game. So you use basically your left hand to control one brother, and then your right hand to control the other brother. And these two brothers have to work together to solve different puzzles and, navigate the environment and things like that. And the way that works in the game is just lovely, beautiful. I strongly, strongly recommend that, especially if you have a sibling. Like it's even more meaningful, or like family that you care about. Like I think it's even more meaningful that way. If you're an only child, then
you will benefit from it.
It may not pierce your icy heart. And then one other game that I want to talk about that is also in the walk 'em up category, but it's sort of experimental, it's just a trip. It's called The Stanley Parable, where you are playing this office worker who looks around and finds that everyone is gone in the office, and he just gets up and tries to see what's going on. But that is not the game. That is all I can tell you, but that is not the game. It's a trip from there. It's just an experience you have to have. So go and play that. I think a lot of these games are relatively cheap, except for The Witcher, which is also The Witcher, I think I might have 500 hours logged on it. So, I think it's relatively cheap in the sense that you are getting a lot of entertainment for your money. And there's so much rich story to go along with that. It's so fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. So those 4 games, And those are all my picks. All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on Views on Vue, and we hope to see you next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHE